मेरा नाम आयशा शेख है। मैं यहाँ यूक्रेन में फंसी हुई हूँ। यहाँ पे इमरजेंसी सिचुएशन हो गई है।
उन लोगों को हमारी लाइफ की कोई भी वैल्यू नहीं है। इवन इंडियन गवर्नमेंट को हमारी लाइफ की कोई भी वैल्यू नहीं है। इस सिचुएशन में भी उन लोगों ने एयर टिकट 60-70,000 की हुई।
The situation is in danger of spiraling into a major crisis.
The Russian president declared the war on the record. Should I play the video?
Good evening and welcome to our special programming from 8 to 10 o'clock tonight on what is virtually war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Will this lead to a full-scale war in Europe? Remember the visuals we are seeing today: air raid strikes, sirens, missile attacks, troops rolling in, crossing international borders, Russian troops and tanks now in Ukraine. These are scenes which have not been seen since the Second World War. What will this lead to? Well, Vishnu and Vasu also join me, and we'll have guests from around the world and the key players and newsmakers on tonight. Because, of course, Vishnu, you were actually on that plane today, flying to Ukraine when suddenly Ukrainian airspace was closed as Putin declared war against Ukraine.
In fact, the airfield we were going to be landing in, the airport we were going to be landing in, was in fact attacked with missiles. The runway was shut down, airspace was closed, and we were over Iran, in fact, when the captain came online and said we have to turn back.
In fact, Vasu, also India's role is now emerging as key, because as the United States and Europe, Japan, Australia all condemning Russia, India and China both saying restraint on both sides, and now we hear of a conversation to be held between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin. So India really emerging as a key player here with a dialogue open to Russia President Putin, and of course the rest of the world.
That's right. India's position has been somewhat of a cautious balancing act, which has also led to some criticism as well from the opposition party, saying that India should take a much stronger stand. But obviously India trying to balance its competing strategic interests in trying to walk this cautious middle path. The government, as we just saw, because the Prime Minister, all key ministers were in fact in the middle of campaigning in the Uttar Pradesh elections, came back to Delhi. High-level meeting, we believe, still going on at the Prime Minister's residence with the Prime Minister, other members of the Cabinet Committee on Security, and which, as you said, could culminate in a late-night phone call between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin. What exactly will be exchanged and what outcome it will yield is still an open question. But clearly, this has put India very much on the diplomatic and strategic tightrope tonight.
Right, so let's just look at the top headlines at 8 o'clock tonight. Russia's war against Ukraine. Russian tanks roll in, airstrikes against major Ukrainian cities as Vladimir Putin clears the full-scale invasion before dawn this morning against Ukraine. The explosions near Kyiv airport and major cities. Air raid sirens as residents huddle in bomb shelters as Ukraine's airspace is shut and Indian flight is turned back. A lifeline for Indian students. The Prime Minister chairing the Cabinet Committee of Security called an emergency meeting this evening with top ministers. Also, the big headline: he will speak to Russian President Vladimir Putin tonight. India at the UN today called for restraint on all sides. Will Putin's invasion lead to a war in Europe? The world condemns Putin. India and China urge restraint on all sides. NATO says they're not moving troops to Ukraine as of now. The UN Security Council meets this morning, chaired by Russia, ironically, abruptly adjourned. An estimated 18,000 Indian students currently stranded in Ukraine. The Indian embassy issues an advisory saying go to nearest bomb shelters if you hear explosions, but efforts now on for ground evacuation from the western borders of Ukraine through Hungary, Slovakia and Poland. Global oil prices crossed $100 a barrel. The Sensex tanks over 2,700 points. Russian stocks also slumped 45%. Global markets also down. Well, let's just look at the top developments as we speak right now. Well, the Russian president announced the military operations in Ukraine before dawn this morning. Bombardment began in Ukrainian cities. Russian ground forces and military vehicles crossed into Ukraine, with air raid sirens being heard in Ukraine's capital and many major cities. Eyewitness footage also shows explosions near Ukrainian airport. People are taking refuge in bomb shelters. 18,000 Indians stranded, the situation tense, but stay calm, says the government. Let's go across to reporters who are covering this for NDTV currently live. Let's go across to Jyoti Hare, who's reporting from NDTV currently in Kyiv, Ukraine's capital. Jyoti, what can you tell us of what the situation is currently right now?
Well, in the past 3 hours, we can see a ramp up of more military within Kiev. This is causing great alarm. If you just look over my right shoulder here, it's a bank machine. There's 10, 15 people deep. It's been like this since this morning. And on the other side, I'm not sure if you're getting a good angle of that. We've got the pharmacies with huge lineups all over the city. So in the past, about an hour ago, we had the second round of air raids. So the first were this morning, and then the second this afternoon, which also has alarmed the public. And clearly there is something happening, approaching, and some of this might have to do with the fact that we know troops from Belarus, and we don't know if they're Belarus troops or Russian troops, but have crossed into Ukraine and into the Kyiv district a few hours out. And so at this moment, I've seen a few buses of soldiers. I've seen about 10, 15 military vehicles going down the main road next to me here. So there's definitely a huge difference between this morning, this afternoon. This morning was about surprise, alarm. We can't believe this happened. This afternoon is about getting ready. In fact, the president of Ukraine has even called on all Ukrainians who are able to fight to get armed and sign up.
The Ukrainian president asking all citizens to arm themselves and defend the country. Let's just look at the top developments in this story breaking before dawn this morning.
Air raid sirens go off in Ukraine's capital Kiev as Russia launches a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Before dawn, just as Russian President Putin announced a special military operation in Ukraine, the bombardment began in Ukrainian cities. People woke up to emergency sirens, explosions, smoke, and an announcement of martial law. The Russian invasion of Ukraine had begun soon after a televised speech by Russian President Vladimir Putin asking the Ukrainian troops to lay their arms and return home.
Its purpose is to protect people who have been subject to abuse and genocide by the Kiev regime for 8 years. And to do this, we will strive to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine.
The Russian president also warned West of dire consequences if it attempted to intervene.
Whoever tries to interfere with us, let alone create threats for our country, for our nation, must know that Russia's response will be immediate, and it will lead you to such consequences that you've never faced before in your history.
In Ukraine, people were asked to stay indoors and not venture out unless absolutely necessary.
Росія здійснила удари по нашій військовій інфраструктурі та по нашим прикордонникам, прикордонним загонам. В багатьох містах України було чутно вибухи. Ми вводимо воєнний стан на всій території нашої держави. Без паніки. Ми сильні, ми готові до всього. Ми всіх переможемо.
Shelling and missile strikes were reported across the country as Russia began an invasion from land and sea. The special military operation appeared to be an all-out blitzkrieg. Russian troops landed in the southern port city of Odessa, crossing from Russia to Kharkiv, the second largest city in the country. Russian military vehicles rolled from Crimea. Rockets also attacked Ukrainian fighter jets parked at an airport outside its capital Kiev. As air raid sirens blared, people rushed for cover in subway stations. Cars began to pile up as people rushed to fill gas in their vehicles. Ukraine closed its airspace. The country was in panic.
There have been explosions across Ukraine overnight as Russia begins the long-anticipated attack. Here in Kiev, in the capital, we heard a number of explosions off in the distance overnight that sort of jolted the city awake, and more recently, air raid sirens indicating that some of these attacks are getting closer.
To make matters worse, Russia's close ally Belarus joined the war, invading Ukraine from the north through intense artillery fire. And in the east, the Russian-backed rebels also began attacking Ukrainian forces. High-precision air and military strikes are being used to disable the Ukrainian air defense to pave way for an all-out ground assault. But what will be the collateral damage in terms of civilian casualties? An assessment can only be made when the sounds of war are silenced. NNDTV Bureau Report.
And Vishnu, let's just go across to understand now why this is so crucial for Europe. And this really is at the heart of the matter, because Ukraine borders Europe, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine could lead to worse is what Europe fears. Just explain to us really what this means.
Sure. So Sonia, let's start with this map. And this actually gives you an idea of the areas where Russian forces have invaded Ukraine today. It started out in all the areas, but first let's look at the areas in the south. The area in the south, which is in red, is Crimea. It's been under Russian control since 2014. They went into the Ukraine from there. They then started moving to the east of that area itself. Let's just highlight those areas as well. Those are the areas in the south: Odessa, Crimea. Then further to the east in Donetsk, Luhansk, that's part of the Donbas region, which has been central to this entire area. And moving into that direction, moving west, remember Russia does control a part of that territory, but they want to push westwards even more. Then, of course, the most significant city over there, Kiev itself, which lies to the north. And to the east of Kiev, you can see the city of Kharkiv, not too far from the boundary with Russia. But Kiev itself is now very much the focus. Why? Because that is where there is an expectation that if the Russians are pushing for regime change, then they need to have soldiers on the ground, boots on the ground. Thus far, we've not seen that happening. We've not seen that happening. It doesn't mean it's not happening. There have been reports that the Russians have started breaching the outer perimeter of Kiev itself, coming in south from Belarus, which lies to the north. It's just a few hours' drive.
So when will Kiev fall? That really is the key question, and that's what the world is watching. Remember, NATO has said we're not looking at troops in Ukraine yet, but that could all very rapidly change. Let's just look at the world reaction at first. The Prime Minister is currently chairing a cabinet committee meeting on security, and the big breaking news tonight is that the Prime Minister will also be speaking to Russian President Vladimir Putin tonight. Remember that India along with China are the two major countries, the two global powers which have not yet condemned Russia. They have in fact called for restraint on all sides. So that phone call will be watched not just by India but by global leaders as well. China also just appealing for restraint. And remember, ironically, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan was also in Moscow today and met Vladimir Putin. But let's just look first at the global reactions coming in first from the United States. So the US Secretary of State has warned of massive consequences for Russia.
Said very clearly that if Russia continues to escalate, so will we. And so they have to factor that into what they're thinking. At the end of the day, if that doesn't stop President Putin, we've made very clear, along with all of our allies and partners, that there will be massive consequences going forward, a price that Russia will have to pay for a long, long time.
In concert with our allies, we will agree a massive package of economic sanctions designed in time to hobble the Russian economy. And to that end, we must also collectively cease the dependence on Russian oil and gas that for too long has given Putin his grip on Western politics.
President Putin, in the name of humanity, bring your troops back to Russia. In the name of humanity, do not allow to start in Europe what could be the worst war since the beginning of the century.
中方正在密切地关注最新的事态，我们也呼吁各方保持克制，避免局势失控。关于乌克兰问题呢，我们已经多次表明了我们的立场。乌克兰问题是有着非常複雜的歷史背景和經緯，演變到了今天這種局面。
今回のロシアによる侵攻は力による一方的な現状変更を認めないとの 国際秩序の根幹を揺るがすものであり、ロシアを強く非難するとともに、米国をはじめとする国際社会と連携して迅速に対処してまいります。
Together with the international community, we are banding together in strong terms to condemn these outrageous acts in the strongest possible terms. We denounce what are unilateral hostile actions in Ukraine. Russia is flagrantly breaching international law and the UN Charter. Russia has chosen war.
Dieser 24. Februar ist ein furchtbarer Tag für die Ukraine und ein düsterer Tag für Europa. Mit seinem Angriff auf die Ukraine bricht der russische Präsident Putin abermals eklatant das Völkerrecht. Putin bringt damit Leid und Zerstörung über seine direkten Nachbarn. Er verletzt die Souveränität und die Grenzen der Ukraine. Er gefährdet das Leben von unzähligen Unschuldigen in der Ukraine, dem Brudervolk Russlands.
This is a grave moment for the security of Europe. Russia's unjustified and unprovoked attack on Ukraine is putting countless innocent lives at risk. With air and missile attacks, ground forces and special forces from multiple directions, targeting military infrastructure and major urban centers. This is a deliberate, cold-blooded and long-planned invasion.
The Russian Federation ought to relinquish responsibilities of the President of the Security Council, pass these responsibilities on to a legitimate member of the Security Council. There is no purgatory for war criminals. They go straight to hell, Ambassador.
Корень сегодняшнего кризиса вокруг Украины в действиях самой Украины, занимавшейся многолетним саботажем своих прямых обязательств по Минскому комплексу мер. Еще на прошлой неделе существовала надежда на то, что в Киеве одумаются и все-таки выполнят то, под чем подписались в 2015 году. Для этого прежде всего был нужен прямой диалог с Донецком и Луганском. Однако очередное подтверждение неготовности Украины к такому диалогу, к шагам по предоставлению Донбассу особого статуса, предусмотренным Минскими соглашениями, причем с поддержкой этой позиции западными покровителями, окончательно убедило нас в том, что мы просто не имеем права заставлять жителей Донбасса страдать и дальше.
Well, let's go across tonight for this NDTV exclusive. Joining me tonight is Mr. Roman Babushkin. He's the charge d'affaires of the Russian embassy in India. Mr. Babushkin, you're joining me at a time when the world, you've seen world leaders have come together to condemn Russia. You've heard the Ukrainian envoy say there's a special place in hell for war criminals, speaking to the Russian envoy at the UN Security Council. What would you say today, Mr. Babushkin, to fears that Russia is causing another war in Europe, scenes we haven't seen since the Second World War?
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. I would say, first of all, don't be misguided with the plenty of disinformation and rhetoric coming from the other side, because the situation is crystal clear. So the red lines are crossed. Russia was waiting for 7 years for Ukraine to implement Minsk agreements and to start negotiations with Donbas and Donetsk. Instead of that, so war started not just today, it started 7 years ago. Actually, the special decision of the Russian president today about the military operations to support the liberation of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. In fact, that is the only step to stop the war. This step is being made in a full accordance to the international law, by the way, and full accordance to the UN Charter and according to the treaty obligations which are coming out of the documents which are signed after these new republics were recognized by the Russian Federation.
No, but let me just ask you, Mr. Babushkin, tonight we know that you have said that this is Russia's point of view. We know that Prime Minister Modi is expected to speak to President Putin tonight. India is likely to urge for restraint. It's likely to ask, why is it that Russian troops are now reaching Ukraine's capital if it's just about the two areas that you just mentioned, which you said where President Putin has said there's genocide, that why Russian troops are now attempting to take over the capital of Ukraine. What do you think will be on the agenda tonight when Prime Minister Modi speaks to President Putin?
It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. There is no Russian troops in Ukraine at all. Even they are not present right now in Donetsk and Lugansk regions. You see what happened last night. There was about 2,000 ceasefire violations from the Ukrainian side. So, and Russia targeted only military infrastructure units, and according up to this moment, about 74 units were destroyed, including 11 air bases. Dozens of the Ukrainian border forces are giving up. Those who are fighting just in Nazi elements, which are supported by the Western countries. And Russia has had no plans to invade Ukraine and to occupy Ukraine. Just be defending these people living in the territories of Donetsk and Lugansk because of continuously years by years the policy of genocide and extermination of these people, violations of basic human rights. We have more than 400 criminal cases, invoked against the war criminals.
In fact, Mr. Babushkin, these are words that the words genocide, the words Nazi elements. The Ukraine's president has also talked about how these are scenes that we have only seen in Nazi Germany. Also joining me tonight is the German ambassador to India, Mr. Walter Lindner. Mr. Lindner, you've heard Mr. Babushkin. What is Germany's point of view today? And as I said, are you worried this can lead to war in Europe? Are you worried that when seeing the scenes we've seen today, which really is reminiscent of the Second World War in Ukraine? And how would you respond to what Russia is saying, that this is actually something driven by Nazi elements in the Western countries and there was genocide taking place in these two regions?
You know, listening to the Russian Churchill affair makes me believe he comes from a different world, from the Mars or from the moon or something, because the reality on ground is something different. And it's not my opinion or the German opinion. In the Security Council, more than 60 or 70 people in 70 states were sharing the same opinion. Nobody believes this narrative. This narrative is a fake narrative, of course. You know, in these days, confrontations are done through false narratives. Now, why the necessity of 150,000 army around in peace times around a peaceful nation like Ukraine, just to do maneuvers and then turn by chance these troops into the aggressors, recognizing so-called people republics, which was all, as the NATO Secretary General said, cold-bloodedly planned. It's a whole agenda, and you know the whole world believes one narrative, which is not the one which Russia is presenting. Maybe Russia and Belarus and maybe Syria or some countries, but the rest of the world believes a different narrative.
India and China also walking very careful tightrope. India also asking for restraint on all sides. So let me just go across first straight away to Mr. Yurash, who's a Ukraine MP, the head of the Parliamentary Friendship Group with India. Now, Ukraine's envoy in India today asked for India to intervene strongly, for Prime Minister Modi to speak to President Putin, which is happening now. What would you say, sir, as I have the Russian charge d'affaires in India who has said that there was genocide going on in these regions and that there are no Russian ground troops in Kiev or in Ukraine?
Liars. These people have invaded my country in all directions. Their forces basically are invading north and south, in the east, and are killing people every minute that we speak with you. I'm recharging the weapons we've been distributed right now to try and defend Kiev, because there are battles around Kiev happening with the Russian army. They have been actually, some of them actually given up, and we already have videos with them. Time and time again, we've seen this happen. Russia making outrageous claims, telling lies to the world, and telling that everybody that it attacks is to blame. Very simply speaking, Russia is not to be trusted, and the world is seeing this right now, finally. And the images you're showing on your screen shows this very clearly. Every single part of Ukraine was hit by missiles. I'm come from the west of Ukraine. The west of Ukraine was hit, the east, the center, everywhere. Missiles from Russia are falling on Ukraine, and we are preparing to defend Kiev as we speak.
Mr. Yurash, for a country and people at war, as I said, Can you show us the arms? I mean, it's actually, when we saw those pictures, the citizens huddling in bomb shelters and the arms, what is it like for you today as, forget being an MP, but as a citizen where a country has been invaded?
We know that if we want to have a chance against Russia, we need to arm everybody. So we are giving up weapons to various veterans, to various people who are going to stand and fight, because Russia is trying to have a blitzkrieg on Ukraine. They're trying to overwhelm our forces from every direction. We have a simple situation, which is basically we are now receiving weapons and are preparing for a fight, because every single Ukrainian right now needs to stand, and if he believes that our country should have its right to exist, they should defend our country and take the Russian lies to the task.
Mr. Babushkin, how would you answer this MP is currently in Kiev? He said, I'm arming myself. I can see my people being attacked. Who are they being attacked by if it's not the Russians?
We have no intention to attack any city of Ukraine. So there was a targeted operation against the military infrastructure units. This is one thing, and what may happen in other cities and some bomb blasting or etc. So the pattern is very similar to what have happened in Syria, for example. Like white helmets were making some staged videos about the civilians who were dying, and but it was it has become a pretext for sanctions, for another pressure, for other blackmail about the situation, and to attract some more people to believe that it is true, but it's not true.
Again, Mr. Babushkin, he is currently there arming himself. He wouldn't be doing that. Why would individuals be doing this as a pretext for sanctions? Is this about, now the West says this is about one man. It's about President Putin's dream to take back areas of the former Soviet Union. It's about one man taking his country to war. And the worry that he said today that the consequences, if other countries intervene, will be catastrophic. What did he mean by that? Will there be a second war in Europe, you think? Is that what President Putin is now looking at? Of course, this is, many have made the comparison again to Nazi Germany and Poland and what the rest of the world kept waiting and watching as Hitler went through Europe.
So in fact, we were waiting for so many years and for these Minsk agreements to start being implemented. But in all these years, we were recognizing all this Donetsk and Lugansk Republic as part of Ukraine. So other examples of the post-Soviet history,
you have to kill everybody on Ukraine
post-Soviet history, and including the recent developments in Kazakhstan, show that Russia has no intention to violate.
Mr. Yurash, yes, Mr. Yurash just wanted to make a point. Go ahead, Mr. Yurash, you wanted to respond?
Your lying excellency, let me just tell you that when this is all done and dusted, this video shall be remembered by the future Russia that will emerge on the grave of Putin's regime, and you will be tried. You will be taken to task for every single word of those lies that you are telling the world right now. Very simply speaking, we are now prepared. I'm sitting now by the hotel which has the national journalists in Ukraine, CNN, Fox News, BBC, CBS. They see what's happening. They will tell the world what's happening. Your lies don't stand a chance. The world shall put you into your place. As you hear the bells ring from the central cathedral of Kiev, arming Ukrainians and telling them to be prepared, because your forces are right now around Kiev. My friend leads a defense unit around Kiev, and he's fighting against your soldiers. He sees their badges, he sees their weapons, sees their insignia. You are invading my country and trying to destroy it. Stop telling lies and see yourself in the mirror for what you are, a liar.
My dear friend, we are trying to save your country.
You are trying to destroy my state and its ability to truly see the future for what we want to see it as a democratic, independent nation.
Your state was destroyed by the Western-supported coup d'etat in 2014, anti-constitutional coup d'etat, which brought to the power those people who are promoting the ultra-nationalist,
I'm going to let Mr. Yurash actually, as I said, this currently, as we're seeing, is a precursor. It's an invasion of a country. Now, whatever we put it as, we can see the scenes. As we said, the world journalists there who are not allied to either side, who is reporting what's happening. We can see explosions. Mr. Babushkin, thank you for coming on NDTV. Mr. Yurash, we wish you safety, and we wish every citizen, whether it's in Russia or Ukraine today, safety. Thank you very much. And let's go across to Mr. Saeed Akbaruddin, who joins me, former ambassador and former India's permanent representative to the United Nations. In fact, Mr. Babushkin, if you can keep him on as well with Mr. Akbaruddin and Mr. Lindner. Mr. Akbaruddin, you're seeing what happened. There's unprecedented scenes of a Ukraine MP saying he's sitting and arming himself because the president has called for citizens, all citizens, to take up arms to defend their country. What is the truth, and what should India's stand be in this today? Prime Minister Modi and India emerging as major players who have aligned to both Russia and the rest of the world and Ukraine.
First of all, Sonia, thank you for giving me an opportunity to engage with you and through you to the large number of NDTV viewers. That said, obviously, it's a day of disappointment. It's a very day of disturbing developments. And it's a very worrisome situation for everybody because we've seen a collapse of diplomacy. We've seen the outbreak of hostilities. And nobody would be happy with the situation that we are confronted with today. From an Indian perspective, we need to understand that the situation that we are confronted with is a difficult one. We have our nationals caught amidst the hostilities. We have strong ties.
Mr. Lindner, if I can just go across to you right now, Mr. Lindner. When we saw NATO saying that we won't right now put troops into Ukraine, we've seen America calling for massive consequences. What are European countries, what is NATO's plan next?
I have to come back to what has been said by the Russian Shacheda affair. You know, this propaganda machine is difficult to digest, I must say, because it was really a shameful day for Russia, a shameful day. And I think many Russians think the same. Russia is a great nation with great people, great history, and they don't deserve this kind of shameful day. The shameful day is an unprecedented military aggression against a peaceful neighbor. And the whole world is watching. So what UN Charter would justify this? You know, this is a ridiculous argument, justifying to move the borders, to violate the borders. What do we say to the hundreds of border disputes around the globe? So should everyone now that the law of force should prevail against the force of law? Is that what we want? The right of the jungle just because you have a few tanks there? This can't be the truth. And I'm sorry for Russia. This is not the way they should act. This is unacceptable. And I think many states, the whole majority in this world, see it as it is. And I think that's the clear truth.
Yes. Mr. Akbaruddin, should India take sides now in this conflict? You've seen some opposition MPs saying that India must say what is unconscionable. India must say that sanctity borders of countries must be respected. Do you think India should take sides now in this conflict?
So, Sonia, Indian diplomacy has been fairly consistent in its trajectory and its legacy. Given complex situations, we calibrate our approach. What we need to tell, we do it in a way which is different from public diplomacy postures. Look at the history of Indian responses across the board. In 1956 in Hungary, our approach has always been non-condemnatory in nature. It doesn't mean to say that we are disappointed. It doesn't mean to say that we are taking sides, but we are, as a people, as a approach, we have been non-condemnatory. Look at 1956 under Prime Minister Nehru in Hungary. Look at 1968 under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi towards Czechoslovakia. Look at 1979 in Afghanistan. Look at 2008 in Georgia, South Ossetia, and look at 2014 in Crimea. So there is a consistency of our approach. How we need to address it, we will address it. That said, it's happened this morning. Before that, we were all calling for a peaceful settlement, and that was the drumbeat all around.
Right.
Since things have changed, there are discussions underway. Give time and space. India will communicate to all parties. We have good ties everywhere. So
Absolutely.
we will communicate in our way, in a traditional approach, what we think. And to think that India is in a happy situation is not correct, because nobody could be more worried than the Indian foreign policy establishment about things that are happening, because it changes the geopolitical equation for India in many, many ways.
And we have Pakistan's Prime Minister also there today in Moscow, who in fact says that I've landed at an interesting time. We'll have more on that after we just take this quick break. So there's Prime Minister Imran Khan of Pakistan meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin. Mr. Putin looking very calm, not looking like he's sanctioned a military invasion there this morning. So there we have it, and we'll take a quick break. Back right after this with lots more.